year is 1865. Lee surrendered on April 9th. April 15th, Lincoln was killed. April 10th or May 10th, Jefferson Davis was captured. So why is it that a battle was fought right here a month later? Stick with me and I'll let you know. The first thing you need to know is about the two commanders of the Union Army and the Confederate Army. And I have a piece of paper here if you see me looking down. The Union Army was commanded by Colonel Theodore Barrett. He'd been an Army officer for a number of years, but had never seen combat. The Confederates were under the command of Colonel Ford. He was based in Brownsville. Now where I'm standing at is the Palmetto battlefield, the last land battle of the Civil War, and where the last person was killed during the Civil War. Roughly 10 miles to the west of me is Brownsville. 5 miles to the east of me is the Gulf of Mexico. Less than a mile behind me is the Rio Grande River, and just behind my van, which is trying to block off road noise here, behind my van on the other side is the ship channel that brought goods in and out of the port of Brownsville. It still does to this day. Now, why this area right here is important for this story is because during the Civil War, the Union blockaded this. I've covered this in some other videos. They blockaded it because we have the salt lakes. They were taking salt out of here and selling it. The Confederates were. This is King Cotton territory. If you want cotton and you're wearing cotton, the odds are that either all of it or part of it came from down here. As a matter of fact, this time of year, you can't go anywhere without seeing it being harvested, hauled, whatever. The fields are just full of it. Having said that, directly over here, a mile maybe, is South Padre Island, Texas. The Union blockaded this port to stop any of the goods from being taken out. So the Confederates had friends in Mexico. They liked getting the business and they liked getting the money from it, and they were sympathetic to the Confederacy. So what they would do is bring the cotton, the salt, the other goods down through here, through Brownsville, into Mexico, into what's now Matamoros, put it on Mexican flagships, and take them out, and there was nothing the Union could do about it. It irritated the Union so much that at one point they sent an army down here to take Fort Brown, which is what Brownsville is named after. They took it, they held it for a while, then the Confederates came back and took it and held it till the end of the war. That leads us to this location. At the end of the war, all the stuff up north had already happened. Lee had surrendered, Lincoln had been killed, Davis had been captured, a new president had been put in. Texas hadn't surrendered yet. Texas had not given up its armies yet. And sitting right here, right on this spot, was Palmetto Ranch. Just a mile east of us is White Ranch. And like I said, about 10 miles or so, more or less, to my west was Fort Brown. Still Fort Brown, it's now a college. On this location and at White Ranch, there were Confederate outposts to stop the Union from coming in. Earlier, General Grant had ordered one of his officers to come and talk to the commander of this area about a truce. The war was over. Everybody knew it. It was just a matter of time at that point. Nobody had surrendered yet, but it was a useless thing. So, the two commanders talked here at a place called Port Isabel, which is still here to this day. They talked at Port Isabel and came up with a gentleman's agreement not to attack each other because it wasn't going to do any good. Now, roughly, the Confederates had 400 to 600 men, roughly. The Union had 2,000 men stationed on an island off the mainland right here. It was the safest place for them to be. They didn't have to worry about the Confederates bringing an army down and booting them completely off. Plus, it helped them with their blockade of the The commanding officer that had agreed to that retired from the Army. He knew the war was over and left. Here comes Barrett. Barrett wanted a battle record. Some people claim that he wanted to capture horses for his cavalry because they didn't have any horses. They had unmounted cavalry, which, as we all know, is just infantry. However, as you can see behind me, this is a desolate place. This still looks exactly like it did back then, because nothing's been built here except for this fence and this little gravel parking area that I'm standing in, and some telephone poles and power poles. The Confederates themselves had trouble keeping their horses fed, which becomes a kind of an important detail, because at the time that all this battle happened, the Confederates were spread out all over this area down here, their cavalry, so they could feed and water their horses. Now, I'm going to get the camera readjusted real quick here, and then I'll tell you about what happened. On May 11th, Barrett ordered his men to come down here and take the outpost at White Ranch and here at Palmetto Ranch. Early in the morning, they left. There were some problems with a steamship that broke down. There was a storm, so he had to use rowboats and such to get his men across from the island onto the mainland. Because of that, he took the shorter route, or had them take the shorter route that brought them on this side of the ship channel, the southern side of the ship channel. That becomes important later. Now, they marched down here. They got to White Ranch, got ready for their surprise attack. The surprise was on them. There were no troops there. All the troops had been pulled back to here, to Palmetto, a couple of days before they got there. Now, I told you earlier that on the other side of the river was the Mexican army and the French army. That becomes important right here. Two spots, really. So, Barrett decides he's going to march his men, or the man he put in charge, is going to march his men down here and hit this spot the following morning. So, if you see back there, you can see this thicket that's on the back side over here. He took his men up into there, bedded them down for the night because they'd been marching all day and all night, bedded them down, fed them, so they could get up in the morning and attack this location right here where the Confederates were at. The problem is the Rio Grande is right there. On the other side of the Rio Grande was the French border guards and the Mexican army, who were friends with the Confederates. So they saw the men camped there. They booked it down here, came across, excuse me, and told the Confederates that the Union was there. So a very small force is here, 100 or so. They get ready for the morning. The Union comes in, fires at them. The Confederates can't hold off that big of a force. They back up. Meanwhile, they've sent word back to their commander and said, we need reinforcements. He sends word back, on the way. He sends his people out to bring the cavalry back in that's scattered all over South Texas, getting grass and water for their horses. But he also sends the order back, hold out the best that you can. So what does he do? He turns around and attacks the Union. The Union falls back onto this hill right here. They're holding it. He outnumbers the Confederates 2-1, a little over 2-1. He has the high ground. For some reason, he decides that he can't hold that spot, and he falls back to White Ranch. Okay, Confederates come forward, keep contact, but the battle's pretty much over for that day. He then sends, the Union officer then sends word back to his boss, Barrett, and says, I need reinforcements. The Confederates have found out we're here. He says, I'm on my way. He comes up with 200 more men. They form up here. They attack the Confederates, come right back across this field again. Confederates are falling back, and falling back. Now I got to spin the camera to show you what happened on this side. Now, to give you a perspective, I did not move the tripod. I was standing 8 foot over there. That's how small this battlefield is right here. Now then, if the camera picks it up, you can see that there's a hill right here on the back side, right before the Rio Grande. There's a little rise and a hill. The Confederates fell back to there. Union Army's coming across here, the support shows up from the Confederates. 250, they say these numbers are all hinky because it depends on who you talk to and which things you read, which accounts you read. Somewhere between 250 and 400 cavalry, plus the definite is 6 field cannons. They show up over here. So now the Union is caught in kind of a Y. They have the original force on this side, they have the cannons and the cavalry coming from this side. They have the Rio Grande over here, and they have the ship channel over here. They are stuck. And the river here winds. It twists back and forth on itself the whole way here, or the whole way out to the Gulf. So it's causing natural barriers. So the Union forces line up across here in a defensive position because they figure they've got their back covered. Now here's where some of the reports get kind of iffy. The Union reports they started receiving fire from the other side of the river, from the Mexicans and the French army. Whether that happened, nobody can confirm. It's not in any of the Confederate papers. But if it did happen, they wouldn't write it down anyway. So now they're being hit from here, and from there. Cannons get set up right here. You can't see it. Spin a little more. Cannons get set up right here and start firing across this field. They can't hold up to that. Mounted cavalry is coming down their flank. The soldiers are coming up the front. Barrett orders a full-out retreat. His retreat is so bad that he tries to blame another officer for it after the war, and the Union calls in a Confederate officer, the commanding officer of this force, to come and testify as to what happened. Now then, Confederates, or the Union's taking off this way, they're being chased. They get to a good holding point, but don't stop. They just keep going. Barrett just keeps going. His men are caught in these, where the river winds, they'll go this way and all of a sudden they're trapped. There's a river and the Confederate cavalry's coming down on them. So they're trying to get across the river to live. The French and the Mexicans on the other side shooting them because they're invading their country. So it's estimated that 30 or so men died in the river trying to get away from the Confederates. They go back. They finally get down to the port, well, to where they're going to cross, to where their boats are at. The officer from this side says, okay, that's enough. They've learned their lesson. They're on their way back. His boss, a general, comes along and says, no, go get them. So they turn around, they go back, but he doesn't really ever attack them. They fire some shots, but it's nothing, it's half-hearted. They leave. Shortly thereafter, Texas surrenders. Their troops turn over their weapons and stuff. The troops that were here, a good number of the troops that were throughout South Texas, but specifically these, take their guns, their weapons, their equipment, and their men, and they go across the river to Mexico. Some join with the French, some join with Juarez. It's irrelevant who they joined with. The issue is that they did not surrender. They never pledged allegiance to the U.S. like the rest of the troops had to. So in response, the U.S. government sends down 50,000 troops after the war to occupy a big section of Texas. And it's a weird section. If you look at it on a map, you can see what they were doing. They were trying to put pressure on the French to deal with the Mexicans. And they were putting up a force to try and deal with a dirt road. And I still get a car go by. They're trying to deal with the Mexicans, and they know that there is a sizable thousands of Confederate troops on the other side of the border, fully armed and loaded and ready to come back across. It never happens. They eventually parole them, and most of them come back. The vast majority of them come back. I'm going to turn the camera one more time. I'm going to show you something, and then that'll be the end of this video. Give me just a second. Had to turn the camera into the wind. Hopefully the new microphone system will deal with that. The last significance, besides this being the last battle of the Civil War, which happened to be a Confederate victory a month after the war had ended, is that within 100 yards, if you look directly is regarded by all historians, the vast majority of them, there's probably an odd one out there that doesn't, as the last man killed in the Civil War. So, in this location, so far away from everything that was happening in Virginia, North Carolina, that whole area up there, was the last land battle of the Civil War, was the last man killed in the Civil War, was the last Union defeat, the last Confederate victory. All of it happened right here on this field, with the exception of the power poles and this gravel parking lot being put in. Hasn't changed since then. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Until next time, get out in the dirt and have some fun.